Going to study a sugya tonight, Emir Hashem, about children and Yom Kippur. So please turn to Ayin Ches Amid Beis, and we begin with Tana Rabbanan, which is smack in the middle of the Amud. And for the time being, we're skipping the Agadita. We'll see down the line if we want to study the Agadita. But in the meantime, I thought it was worthwhile to focus. This sugya will be relevant not only to Yom Kippur, but in general to the concept of chinuch, of teaching children. So again, for anybody who may have come a half minute late, we're on Daf Ayin Ches Amid Beis, and the first two words in the line, smack in the middle of the page, Tanu Rabbanan. We learned in a brisa, Hatinokos mutarim bekulam, chutz mineilas hasandal. We're not sure the age of tinokos, but certainly they're younger than bar mitzvah. With regard to children who are younger than bar mitzvah, we have two categories. We have what's called a katan shehigia lechinuch. He is at the mature level where he could be taught, he could be trained, and then you have a katan shelo higia lechinuch, that's even younger. The brisa doesn't specify. In a generic sense, it uses the term tinokos. And 4 out of the 5 inuyim, the categories of inui that we spoke about at great length, are not applicable and certainly are not obligatory in the case of a katan. But 1 out of the 5 will apply to a katan, and that's called neilas hasandal. The Gemara later on is going to explain why neilas hasandal is different than the other inuyim and why it should apply to a katan and what age is the katan. Now, in general, as a preliminary background for this Gemara, we have to understand that tinokos are not obligated in mitzvahs. Nevertheless, a gadol is not allowed to feed a katan something that's awesome. So let's say, for example, you're in Disney World on a hot summer day, and the child decides somehow to get hold of ice cream. The ice cream is not kosher. If the child takes the initiative on its own, that's one thing. But you're not allowed to give a child non-kosher ice cream, or for that matter, anything that's not kosher. At this point in the Gemara, we think that this brisa, when it says tinokos mutarim bekulam, it means that a gadol is allowed to feed a katan or wash the body of a katan actively on Yom Kippur. Again, if the Mishnah or the brisa would insist that a katan on his own initiative is allowed to take a drink, is allowed to anoint himself or wash his body, that would be one thing. But to actively wash the body of a katan or feed the child food on Yom Kippur, that's already a different story. So the Gemara asks the following: Maishna nilas hasandal. Why should nilas hasandal be different? It must be that when people see this child and he's walking out with shoes, they're not going to say, well, the katan put on his shoes on his own. The Amri, they're going to rather say, the spectators will say, Inchi of delay. There were Gedolim who tied his shoes onto his feet. And now there's a great chashad. Chashad means suspicion. People are going to suspect that the Gedolim actually fed Easter to the katan on Yom Kippur. Or in this case, they tied the shoes onto the katan's feet. And that is prohibited. And we don't want to create a situation where people are going to begin to think that you're allowed, if you're a gadol, to tie the shoes onto the feet of a katan. And the Gemara asks the following question: if this be the case, if the reason why we're more careful and more strict in the case of Nilas sandals, because people will think that the gadol tied the shoes onto the cotton, is Hanach Nami. What about the cases of Rachita and Tzicha? Amri, why don't we assume that the spectators will come to the mistaken conclusion, the Inchi of Dilu, that it was given, the bath was given by a gadol, or the anointing of the shemen, the sicha, was done by a gadol. So the Gemara at this point is totally perplexed as to why Nilas HaSandal should be different than Rechitza and Sicha. And truth be told, I thought about this and I couldn't come up with any distinction. Maybe you have an idea. I don't see why Nilas HaSandal should be any different than Rechitza or Sicha. Again, if you're talking about the need of the hour, the Katan can't walk barefoot, so therefore on Yom Kippur we're allowed to give him shoes to wear. That's fine. But that's not where the Gemara is heading. The Gemara is heading in the direction of Chashada, which means that the people around them watching what's going on will come to the mistaken conclusion that it wasn't the Katan who put on his shoes on his own initiative. He's too young for that. It must have been his father or his mother or his brother or his sister that did it for him. They tied the shoes on his feet. Why not assume the same thing in the case of Sicha and Rechitza? So the Gemara answers that Rechitza and Sicha is way different than Nilas HaSandal. Whereas Nilas HaSandal is daily. Every single day you have to put on your shoes. On this day of Yom Kippur, how did the cotton get his shoes on? Rechitza and Sicha, on the other hand, are things that are taken care of once a week, twice a week, not on a daily basis. Says the Gemara, Rechitza v'Sicha Amar, the spectator is not going to suspect that it was the gadol who washed the body of the cotton on Yom Kippur itself. They esmal avdile. They see that the child has oil anointed on his body, smeared into his body. They see the child has a bath. His hair looks like they came out of a bath. They're going to assume that this took place on Erev Yom Kippur. But in the case of Nilas HaSandal, the Gemara thinks that you don't tie shoes from yesterday for today. You take off your shoes at night. I once knew someone who didn't take off his shoes at night. But you take off your shoes at night, you put them on the next day. So the Gemara is not happy with this. Sandal nami, emor me'esmol avdile. The spectator is going to judge favorably, and he's going to assume that the gadol tied the shoes down onto the katan yesterday. Gemara says, no. Sandal lo efshar di me'esmol avdile. There's no way that the spectator is going to assume that these shoes were tied onto the feet of the cotton yesterday on Erev Yom Kippur. Because yesterday they tied the shoes on. They were very tight on his feet. And when the child went to sleep, obviously he wasn't going to sleep in shoes that had tied down heavily to his feet. They were loosened. And then on Yom Kippur today, the gadol tied shoes onto the feet of the katan. We can't allow people to come to that conclusion, because even when we say that a katan is not obligated in mitzvahs and he's not obligated in isurim, he can take the initiative on his own, but we're not allowed to actively give him a situation or impose upon him a situation where he will violate an isur. So in the case of Nilas HaSandal, the people will think that it wasn't the cotton who was able to successfully put his shoes on. It was the gadol who put his shoes on, and that took place on Yom Kippur. The Omar Shmuel, Haiman de boy limitem time of the misusa, Bisayim Masani Veligni. You want to get a taste of death? You want to know what death is like? Why would anybody want that? I don't know. Then tie on your shoes and go to sleep with your shoes on. It's a little bit like death. And maybe that's why, as I mentioned before, I was in close proximity with an individual, and more than one actually, that went to sleep with his shoes on. You can guess where that happened. In Bad Arba, that's outside of Beit El. And during basic training, they nudged you without letting you to live. The officers were so hard on us. You had to wake up for roll call, and if you came 5 minutes late, oy vavoy. So some of the Chayalim, I tried to avoid it because of this Gemara, would sleep with their boots on. And if you want to get a taste of death, then tie your shoes on, go to sleep with your shoes on. It's really a tsar gadol. It's something that's, shall I say, uncomfortable. It's worse than being locked in an elevator for an hour, which just happened to me now. But anyway, so therefore, since it's not the way of most people to go to sleep with shoes, certainly it was the gadol who put the shoes onto the feet of the cotton. And therefore the Chachamim prohibited the ilas hasandal in the case of a cotton on Yom Kippur because of chashad. Rechitza and sicha, on the other hand, is not a problem. There's no chashad. The roa, the spectator, will assume that yesterday the child was given a bath or was anointed with the oil. Now, based on this assumption, at this juncture in the Gemara, that the Brisa would allow the Katan himself to do what for us, Gadol, would be a violation of the Inui. He could eat and he could drink on his own. He could wash his body and anoint his body on his own on Yom Kippur. And the Gadol is not allowed to do it for him and actively feed him or wash his body or anoint his body with oil on Yom Kippur. The Gemara asks the following kasha: look at the Brisa. The Brisa says, quote, Hatinokos, mutarim. Mutarim means lechatchila ktani. What does the Gemara mean when it says lechatchila ktani? It means that if the gadol would come and ask this question, we would say it's mutter. And the Gemara now assumes that these categories of inui did not apply in the case of a katan. So the gadol who wants to feed the katan would be allowed to do so lechatchila if he asked the question. We would allow him, permit him to feed the gadol, to feed the katan on Yom Kippur, to wash his body, to anoint him. And perhaps what it means, lechatchila, the gadol will ask the question, can we allow feeding the katan, etc., etc.? The gadol himself should know that he should be told that he's allowed to do this on Yom Kippur. Now here, we're going to need the help of the commentaries. I have a summary here of the commentaries. Afshe b'shari suri Torah, afal gav deina kana mitzuvim bahem, mikol makom osu liten lebiyadayim, mikol makom mutal achila v'lashkosa biyadayim on Yom Kippur. Eina tama hetu mishum sharoim yomru sha'osa lehem kein mi'esmol. We're not going to say that mutarim lechatchila means because the onlooker is going to assume that these actions were done yesterday. No. Today, the question is being addressed to the Chacham, and the Chacham is paskening, he's ruling that you're allowed to feed the katan. And we know, as I mentioned at the outset of our discussion tonight, that you're not allowed to give a cut non-kosher food. What's the difference between non-kosher food and eating on Yom Kippur? And the answer is posh. When it comes to Yom Kippur, we consider it a matter of danger, of physical danger. There's no need to feed the cut the non-kosher food during the course of the year, even on a hot day in front of Dumbo. But when it comes to Yom Kippur, the commentaries say there's an element of sakana, of danger, and that's why we're going to allow lechatchila, the gadol, to feed the katan on Yom Kippur. Do you hear this, Rabbosai? There is no, again, we don't know the age of the katan yet. That's going to be coming around the bend. But there is no inhibition about feeding the katan biyadayim, just giving him the food on Yom Kippur. It means that as far as the katan is concerned, there's no iser at all. With regard to non-kosher food, there is a chefza d'isura, there's something also here by giving him non-kosher food. Again, the katan is not mitzuva, but for us to give it to him, we're giving him non-kosher food. That's a chefza d'isura, that's not allowed. But in the case of Yom Kippur, it's all a question of sakana, of danger. And therefore, le'inyan achila u'shesiya mutal achila malashkosa b'yadayim sharei sakana hi lahem im lo yochlu v'lo yishtu. So Rabbeinu Tam asks the following: are we allowed to feed a katan on Yom Kippur even if we know for sure it's not a sakana? The ofen she'ein lehem sakana, is there still a heter? Are we permitted lechatchila to feed the katan and to give him drink? Says Rabbeinu Tam, even if we can get a physician's note with a signature that there's no sakana, we're always afraid that maybe down the line it could lead to a sakana. That's Rabbeinu Tam. Yesh lachush sheyavo lidei sakana, in the future tense. I don't get it. I can understand achila and shesiya, but what about rechitza and sicha? Is the child's life endangered if we don't give him a bath on Yom Kippur? Give him a bath erev Yom Kippur. Give him a bath motzi Yom Kippur. He didn't smear oil onto his body. That makes it into a sakana? What is Rabbeinu Tam talking about? Okay, somehow, if you deny him food and drink, he may dehydrate, etc. There's a possibility the Yishlachach l'sakana. But rechita and sicha, I don't get it. And Rabotai, I'll be honest with you. The only way that I can make any sense out of this Rabbeinu Tam with regard to sicha and rechitza is if I review everything that we've been saying until now, that inui and the opposite of inui is tainuk. And you may recall that we allowed washing the body to remove lichluk, to remove tsoa, anything that is disgusting, repulsive that got attached to his body. We allowed a case of sicha to remove chatotin merosha. He's got painful warts on his head. That's not a sicha which is antithetical to inui. That's a sicha for the sake of health purposes. It's not a sicha shel tainuk. And I think what Rabbeinu Tam is saying here, I have to do a little technology here. I apologize. Sometimes it works. I hope it works. Rabbeinu Tam is telling us that although abstaining from rechita and sicha, as far as the katan is concerned, Yom Kippur, is not going to lead to any mortal danger. But nevertheless, it's mutal lechatchila to wash them and to anoint them with oil, because this is not a rechitza shel tainug, nor a sicha shel tainug. This is within the context of parents who are concerned about the health of the child. That's not shel tainug. And now the Gemara. Yes, somebody I think is speaking, but I if I don't see you, then I can't hear you. So if you'll open your camera, then I will be able to see you, and then I could hear you. Because right now, what I'm hearing without a camera is Minnie Mouse. You know what I mean by Minnie Mouse? If you've been with Zoom for about a year, you'll know these little sounds like Minnie Mouse. But if you open your camera, that's a whole different story. Okay, I don't see that anyone opened their camera. Oh, Brian opened his camera. That's good. Alan, you open your camera, but I don't hear a word. I don't hear a word that you said.
I'm busy with the wedding things that I told you.
Okay, so it's nice that you're around. Yeah. I see Chaim here. Joel, I don't know, Joel? Joel Mac. Mac Joel. Okay, that didn't work. Anyway, let's go on. Ella, the Gemara wants to say again, let's go back to square one. What's the difference between the Ilas HaSandal and the other Inuyim? Now that we're saying that even L'chatchila, the parent is allowed to wash and bathe and feed his child, who's a Tinokes, on Yom Kippur itself, why not apply the same rule to Ilas HaSandal? It's not a tainug, it's not a great pleasure. Ella, says the Gemara, Hanoch de lavra visayu gazur burabot. Hanoch de visayu lo gazur berabot. I'll give you a literal translation of the Gemara, and then we'll try to figure it out. What does the Gemara mean? But literally translated, the Gemara is telling us that in the case of Nilas HaSandal, the Gadol gets nothing out of it. He himself personally has no benefit from the shoes that are being worn by the Katan. Is therefore Gazur Be'Rabbanan. We're not going to allow the Gadol to put shoes on the Katan on Yom Kippur, like all Isurei Torah that we said the Gadol is not allowed to feed a Katan non-kosher food. I know. But these, Rechitza, Sicha, is L'tzorach what? Rivisayu means to raise the child. We have to raise our children. Legadlam. And for that, we need Rechitza and Sicha. If it's our responsibility to raise our children by washing them and anointing them with oil, that was permitted on Yom Kippur, but not Ne'ilas HaSandal. And once again, we're in the dark. Now, you may ask, why do I choose the most difficult Gemaras to learn with you? What, am I a masochist? I don't have an answer to that question. But this is a very, very difficult piece of Gemara. In the note here, he quotes a Ran, Rabbeinu Nissen, that is explained and elaborated on by the Beis Yosef of Yosef Karo. he says that hitzrichu chachamim lechanech es haktana. We have to educate our children. And the way we do that on Yom Kippur is by not putting shoes on their feet. Ach le'inyan rechitza usicha she'ena mefurashin v'kasuv el nilmadim miribui hem nitzrachim legidulam lo tzrichu chacham lechancham b'zeh. The plot grows thick, but let's see if we can get anything out of Abaye. The Amar Abaye, Amrli Aim, right? He had a mother, not his biological mother, who was appointed to raise him. And she said, Revise di nuka. Anything that's necessary to raise the child in the proper way, I'm going to give you the list. Number one, Maya Chamime, hot water to bathe in. A parent should be concerned and feel a sense of obligation to bathe his children in hot water. Not too hot, obviously. Umishcha, and to smear their bodies with oil. Gad al Purta, when the child grows a little bit older, then you know what the body of a young child needs? They also bekutcha. It needs eggs and milk. And the parents have to guarantee a diet that includes eggs and milk for the child. Gad al Purta, the child is a little bit older. Tabure money. We have to give the child destructive toys that he can destroy. I mean, today, the manufacturers will produce toys that look like you can destroy them, but you don't really destroy them. But that's enough. As long as the child can get at its frustration, that's enough. Kihada Rabbah, like the story of Rabbah, what did he buy for his children? Zavin lehu money gzize. He bought for them pottery. The pachra livnei. Pachra means, if I'm not mistaken, that it was made of pottery, but it had cracks in it. So it was like a hand-me-down. It was very inexpensive to purchase it on the market. Umetavri lehu. And as part of their toys and their games and their sport, they would break it. You know, I think to myself that even adults, when they go out and do sports, they go wild and they're trying to break someone else's body, you know. Well, I'm not talking about boxing, but if you've ever seen hockey, for example, so this is the sugya that we have over here. And what perplexes us and remains a question is, why is the parent not required to raise his children vis-a-vis wearing shoes? And if you'd ask me, I would tell you that this is a question of what we call historical sociology. Today, it would be absolutely negligent and irresponsible on the part of parents to let their children go barefoot. But back in the day of the Gemara, children and even adults sometimes would go barefoot. And within the context of etiquette and health, it was not absolutely necessary to wear shoes. In some cases, only the rich people wore shoes. But bathing And apparently anointing with oil, which again is historical and sociological. I don't know if it would apply today like it did then. Maybe it would apply in certain kinds of creams and deodorants and et cetera, that may clean the body and get rid of filth. That's required. That's within the purview of the responsibility of parents, but not Nilas Hasan. And the final maskana of this sugya is that with regard to all inuyim on Yom Kippur, with the exception of Nilas Hasandol, hutar ligdolim lasosam liktanim biyadayim, does not fit into the universal category of an iser lates davar aser biyadayim likot. V'hutru kol inuyim achila shesir rechitza v'sicha. And that's within the framework of chinuch, avalainya nilas asandol, gazru chachamim vasruo, kevan she'eno nitzrach legidulon. It's not absolutely necessary in the course of raising the children. Now, again, as I said before, I want to reiterate in the name of Rabbeinu Tam, we're not dealing with a problem of sakana. We're not lenient here because of danger. And even if you'd be convinced that there's no danger in the child abstaining from rechitza and sicha, nevertheless, the parent, within the framework of chinuch, would be allowed to do this to his child on Yom Kippur itself. Now, we've mentioned in the past, and we'll review this point, there's a tremendous controversy amongst the Rishonim as to what is the status, the Doraisa D'Rabbanan, of the 5 Inuyim. Again, Achil and Shasiya is Doraisa, and it incurs a Chiv Karetz. That's in the Pasuk. But beyond that, we had all sorts of derivations and allusions from this Pasuk in Tanakh, from this Sefer and that Sefer, from Malachim, from Shmuel, from Yechezkel, all different psukim. But that is, according to one school of thought, asmachta d'Rabbanan. But we're dealing with an Isur d'Rabbanan. There's another school of thought that argues that all the Inuyim are Doraisa. They're all Doraisa. And this sugya would be a lot easier to understand if we assume, like that sheet in Rishonim, that the Inuyim are only D'Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan now, when they are mapping out and sketching the Isurim D'Rabbanan of Inuyim and Yom Kippur, they have a leniency within the framework of parents raising their children. And they were matir even to actively wash the body of a child, anoint his body with oil, feed him, and give him drink on Yom Kippur, with the one exception of Ne'ilas Hasan. Rabot said, at this point, we go back to the first Mishnah in the Perek that makes the exception the case of a Kala during the first 30 days of her marriage, and of a Melech. All of Klal Yisrael, with the exception of these two categories, are enjoined from Rechitza on Yom Kippur. But for the Kala, Shelo Tizgan al Baila, that she shouldn't be disgusting to a newly wed husband, and for the sake of a Melech, Biyofyo Techzeno Melech has to project a radiance, a beauty. We're going to allow Rechitza on Yom Kippur. And then we have the cases of Chaya with regard to Ne'ilas Hasandol, and that's a woman after childbirth. All this is attributed to Rabbi Eliezer, the Chacham disagree. Chachamim say the Isur of Rechitza is absolute, straight down the line, and surely Nilas Hasandal, we make no exceptions. Not in the case of a Kala, nor in the case of a Melech, nor in the case of a Chaya, a woman after Shalom. Now, who is the Tana who allowed Melech and Kala? After all, the Mishnah only quotes Rabbi Eliezer at the end of the Mishnah with regard to Ne'ilas HaSandal in the case of a Chaya. Masnisin, the heter in the ratio of a Mishnah for a king or a Kala to wash their faces, Mani. To whom should we attribute the authorship of that leniency recorded in the ratio of the Mishnah? Is this Rabbi Eliezer? Or is it possible that the Chachamim were machmir and dissented against Rabbi Eliezer, but only in the case of Nilas HaSandal? They felt that a Chaya could avoid wearing shoes on Yom Kippur, nothing terrible will happen. But the Chachamim never disagreed with the ratio of Kala and Melech as far as Rechitza is concerned. We can't know. The Mishnah is very ambiguous. On the one hand, the Mishnah has three leniencies, A, B, and C, followed by a dissenting opinion. We don't know if that dissenting opinion is arguing on all these cases enumerated, all the kulas listed in the Mishnah, A, B, and C. Or maybe the Machmirim, the Chachamim, were only strict in case number C, i.e. in the discussion about Nilas HaSandal for a Chaya. So the Gemara answers Rabbi Chanina ben Trajoni. I'm going to quote to you a brisa that formulates the heter of Kala and Melech, attaching it to Rabbi Chanina ben Trajoni. The Sanya we learned in the brisa, HaMelech v'Kala lo yirchutzu es pneihem. Tanakama says, no leniency on Yom Kippur, allowing Rechitza for a Kala or a Melech. For Rabbi Chanina ben Trajoni Omer, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, HaMelech v'Kala yirchutzu es pneihem. So we now see, and it's going to have tremendous repercussions, la halacha, that the Chachamim disagreed even in the cases of Kala and Melech. They were machmir, and they have no leniency to allow Rechitza in the case of a Kala or in the case of a Melech. Then the brisa continues, Hachaya, a woman after birth, Lotino es hasandal. Rabbi Chanina ben Trajoni Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Hachaya tino es hasandal. So we see clearly from this brisa that there is a machlokes here in the Tanoim that covers all three categories, all three scenarios, not just Chaya, but Melech and Kala as well. And as a general opinion, we always say that Yochid v'Rab Malocha Karabim is machlokas between one particular Tana and the Rabbim, the Rabbanan, the Chachamim, then we pass like the Chachamim. Hence, we might not find in Shulchan Aruch a heter of Rechitza on Yom Kippur for a Kala or a Melech. Melech is a little bit less relevant today, you understand. But certainly a Kala is very relevant. My timer, the Gemara now analyzes that kula of Rabbi Eliezer. Melech mishum dichsiv, a pasuk in Yeshayahu Hanavi, Melech b'yafyo techazena einecha. We have to see the Melech in his splendor, in his beauty. And this generates many different halachas in the laws of Malchus, but not the least of which is that the melech has to take a bath on a regular basis. His rechita is necessary in order that the people shall feel a sense of awe. Som tasiv alecha melech shetei moscha alecha. If the melech is in any way meguna, smelly, so to speak, if you don't mind that word, then the offensive odor is going to lower the vision, the stature of the melech in the eyes of the people. They can't tolerate someone who doesn't take a shower on a regular basis. Kala, my timer. Why are you being makil in the case of a kala, Rabbi Eliezer, allowing her to do rechitza on Yom Kippur? And Gemara answers, Kidei shelo tisgana al baila, that she shouldn't be repulsive in the eyes of her brand new, fresh husband. And if she doesn't take a bath, a shower, then he might be, as we call it in modern English, turned off. We don't want that situation. And here the Mefarshim asks the question, what about in the reverse? Now, he's a newlywed, he's a groom. Why don't we allow him to take a shower so that his wife will not be repulsed by him? Amalei Rabbi Rav Rabbi Chia Kalad Kama. Some people, Baruch Hashem, they've been married for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and they still consider their wife a newlywed bride. So to what point are you going to be lenient, allowing a married woman to bathe herself on Yom Kippur? Is she a kala for life? Amalei, Rabbi Chia, that's Rav's uncle, says to his nephew, Kidesanya. I'm going to quote to you a brisa, which is quoted, by the way, at the beginning of Masechet Yoma, in monim tachshitim and akala kol shloshim yom. The case in the Gemara Ksubis is a woman who very shortly after she got married, unfortunately lost her father or her mother, and she is now in a state of avelus over the loss of one of her parents. If she had not been a kala, there would be no leniency allowing her rechitza to wash her body. However, because she's a kala, we're going to give her that 30-day extension period, that stay, and it's a period of 30 days of permission, which we found in the case of Avelus and a newlywed woman, and now we're going to apply to Yom Kippur, allowing her for the first 3 days after her chuppah to wash herself on Yom Kippur, if Yom Kippur falls within the first 30 days of her chuppah, of her marriage. Now, the Mefarshim say that even though we're allowing rechitza, according to this sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, in the case of a kala on Yom Kippur, nevertheless, we want to cut it down to the barest necessity. And therefore, we're going to allow her for this 30-day period, if Yom Kippur comes around, to wash what's ever necessary in order to avoid any sort of, as we said before, turn-off offense to the husband. Now, under many conditions, what that means is she just had to wash her face. On Yom Kippur, nothing terrible will happen if she doesn't take a full body shower or bath. Now, what happens after 30 days? After 30 days, we don't care about a woman looking repulsive to her husband? And Rabbeinu Yonah says something here that's amazing. He says, Hikvar Regila and Baila, they already have an intimate relationship. The Ein Lochash that is Gana, that intimacy has reached a very solid level. And if she doesn't wash herself for the day of Yom Kippur, as we say in Yiddish, Nishkeferla, nothing terrible is going to happen. But the first 30 days of marriage, that's when the intimacy is being cemented. He doesn't know her, she doesn't know him, they're getting to know each other. This is a critical period. And the Torah puts tremendous emphasis on what's called Shalom Bayis. And if for the sake of Shalom Bayis, she has to take a shower on Yom Kippur, it's the first 30 days of her marriage after she's allowed to do so, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Whether Chacham accept it or not, we can vacillate back and forth, two possibilities. Now, I just want to avoid a pitfall here. I don't want anyone to walk out of here thinking that a married woman after 30 days of marriage could look like a schlump. That's an understatement. She constantly should be looking well and well-kempt for a husband. But Shalom Bayis, to override Yom Kippur, is only within the first 30 days. That intimacy of knowing each other, that love relationship has not yet reached its fruition. Everything is brand new, checking out the waters. And this is a time period in which, for Shalom Bayis' sake, Shalot is Gana al Baila, we will allow the Kala to wash herself on Yom Kippur. Why is it necessary to permit a woman after birth to wear shoes? And the Gemara answers, Mishum Tzina, that if she'll go barefoot, she might catch a cold. The floor is cold, especially a stone floor. And this could injure her health. And therefore, we're going to allow, according to Rabbi Eliezer, a chaya to wear shoes on Yom Kippur. Now, how long is she a kala? I'm sorry, how long is she a chaya? Is it 3 days after her birth, she gave birth? Is it 7 days after she gave birth? Is it perhaps 30 days? How long of a period of time do we give a woman who gave birth the status of a chaya to allow wearing shoes on Yom Kippur so that she doesn't catch a cold? And another question that we want to raise here is, what about a chola? A person has an injury on his foot, on let's say the bottom of his foot. He needs something to protect his foot, which is injured, has a wound, from the ground. Can we allow ne'ilas hasandal for the case of this kind of a chola on Yom Kippur? Haheter ne'ilas hasandal l'chaya mishum tzinahu af im ein sakana b'dover. That's the chiddush here. If there was a sakana, we would override everything. We'd allow her to eat and drink. But this is not a sakana situation. And why is her body so sensitive to the cold ground? So I want to mention to you a biological insight or observation of Rabbeinu Manoach. That's a super commentary on the Rambam. He writes, Ragleha shall yoledes mitztanenos b'shas haleda. Already during the birth process, her lower parts, her legs, have gotten cold. There's a certain coldness. And he goes on to say that she lost quite a bit of blood during the Leda period. And when the body is low on blood, it gets cold. So once again, we're not talking about a sakana situation, but perhaps, as we mentioned in Rabbeinu Tam, it could lead to a sakana in the case of a chaya after birth. Omar Shmuel, im machma sakonas akrov mutter. Shmuel says that this heter of ne'ilas sasando is not limited to a chaya. It could apply to every one of us. Why? Because there are akravim. There are scorpions. Today we would talk about other kinds of spiders and perhaps glass on the ground. We don't let anyone go barefoot. So mutar l'chol adam linoles min olav. Is Shmuel therefore completely removing the Isa, the category of Inu called Lilas Hasando? And if you're going to tell me that Shmuel is talking about a situation of Sakanas Nefashos, then I don't need Shmuel to tell me that we override every Isa for the sake of saving lives. So I want to quote to you the Tosefes Yoma Kippurim. Shmuel bo lechadesh shelo rak b'makom sheyesh vadei akrov muter, ela af b'makom shesafek im yesham akrov hutra nilas hasandal. Wow. Shmuel will be matir nilas hasandal even if we only have a doubt and a suspicion that there's somewhere in the neighborhood of Akrav a scorpion. And will allow him to wear shoes. The Mishnah says, ha'ochel, if a person eats on Yom Kippur, the volume size of a koseves hagasa, a large date, chayav. The Gemara says, boy, Rav Papa, he will turn to Daf Ayin Tesam and Aleph. Rav Papa has the following suffix: Kikosevet sha'amru begarinosa o below garinosa. Now, Rabosa, I'm going to explain this Gemara. You may think it's a little bit like hair splitting here, but keep in mind we're dealing with an Isser Kares of Achila and Yom Kippur. And here's the fine difference between begarinosa and below garinosa. When you talk about a date, you can talk about a date with its pit, and the pit is very significant, so that you've now expanded the volume of Kikoseves as far as Yom Kippur is concerned. And if we weren't on Zoom, I would ask you, is this a kula or a chumrah? Anybody? If it's a chumrah, that we're also calculating the pit, then put your thumb up. No thumbs up. If it's a kula, put your thumb down. It says here, Brian and Judy Levin raised hand. Where's the raised hand? So what do I have to do now? Brian, I see your raised hand. So do you want to talk to me? Brian, you still there? Alan, you there? Brian, is this a kula or a chumrah? If it's a kula,
Rabbi, put it up, but I don't know what, I didn't mean to put it up.
Oh, so but I have you now. I have you now on national TV.
No,
So
please, not in this.
Brian, if you think it's a kula, then raise your hand like this.
I abstain.
It's a kula. Why? Because we're assuming now that you don't incur a chiyuv kares unless you eat a larger amount, which means a koseves im garinasa, by expanding the minimum volume of the violation of achila. That's a tremendous kula, because you're not going to be chayiv until you eat that expanded volume. Oh, below garinasa. And when it says kamo garinasa, what it means is that we look at the tamra, this date, without its pit, which is a smaller shear. By Rav Ashi, we have another suffix, which is similar to the suffix of Rav Papa. Etzem kisi ora. We have a din that part of the body, the corpse of the dead, if you come in contact with it, that's called maga umasa, you will be contaminated. And that's called etzem kisaora. It's got the size of a barley bean, a kernel of barley. Says Rav Ashi, I don't know. Is it big klipasa or below klipasa? It's not mitame unless the etzem is large enough to be equal to a saora bikli pasa, the ora kernel with its chaff, or below klipasa. He's already chayav. I mean, he's tamei even below klipasa. Bil acha o biyavesha. What kind of a saora you're talking about? You're talking about a moist, fresh kernel of barley, recently cut, and the moisture adds a certain volume to it, or yavesha. When the kernel dries up, it disintegrates. It's much smaller. So that what we have here is a list of 3 sfeikos. All of them really revolve around the same concept. When we have a shear, does the shear include the garin, the pit? Does it include the kernel? And that's the suffix of the Gemara. So let's make a note of where we got up to for today. And we're on the top of Ayin Tes Amud Aleph. And we started the Sugya Boyer of Ashi on the second line. And that's where we want to continue it next week. Bli neder. Okay then?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you so much. Everyone should have a very, very fine Shabbos, Parshas Chukas. And if you can, I don't know if you have the time, you could join me tomorrow night at 9:00. I offer a shir at 9:00 on Thursdays on the insights of Rav Soloveitchik to the parsha. I also offer a shir at 10:45 a.m. on Fridays on the insights of the Masechet Chachma into the parsha. I also send out 2 videos a week of 2 minutes each on the parsha. And if you're not in my group, please join my group. Doesn't cost you even a koseves agas. Okay, have a great week.